outfit from each decade from the 1910s until today. With the success of the Edwardian-era pattern make, we're now turning to the 1920s and a variation on the one-hour dress. From a French fashion magazine in 1921, there is a write-up on the dress, and it begins with this. The shirt dress that we've been wearing for several seasons hasn't seen its popularity decrease. It is, in fact, the practical dress par excellence. Depending on the fabric you combine it with, it can be an interior, country, evening, or afternoon dress. Since I'm sewing through my stash as well as sewing through the century, I chose gray stretch damask accented with mauve du peony silk, and I'm going to be calling it an evening dress. I'm accessorizing it with my great-grandmother's vintage 1920s jewelry, and I'll be wearing ballroom dance shoes for footwear since they closely resemble the shoes of the era. I was rather skeptical that the measurement guide was going to work, but surprisingly, it was super easy. The dress is pretty much all straight lines, and so I marked them on my fabric with pattern chalk and cut out the pieces. My next step was to make bias binding out of the mauve du peony silk, and I just drafted it right onto the fabric with the fabric chalk pen. And if you think you've drawn enough lines, draw more because you will need more bias binding than you think. Once all the bias binding was cut, I stitched it all together to create a long piece of bias tape, and then I applied it to the neckline and armhole areas. You may have noticed that my original sketch had butterfly sleeves and pockets, but I opted to remove those because they were going to be way more aggravation and they just didn't really look right by the time I started putting the dress together. Once the bias binding was attached around the neckline and underarm areas, I then top stitched it down and sewed from the underarm to the hip area. And then I sewed from the hip area to the hem, leaving the opening where I was originally going to put pockets, which ended up being closed with pleats. As you can see from my illustration, I ended up getting rid of the sleeves and getting rid of the pockets and the bow detail in favor of something a little bit more streamlined and a little easier to put together. Once the pleats were pinned together, I stitched them down and then made the side seams meet up so that it just looked like it had been all done with all the pleats all at one time and it wasn't done in two separate parts. And here I am drafting the shoulder straps, cutting them out and then stitching them together and turning them so that they can go on the dress to hold it on. At this point, I'm putting the shoulder straps on, and then once I put the shoulder straps on, I'm going to top stitch all the way around the edge so it holds everything down and everything looks nice and neat. Here we go, hemming the dress. We are almost done. I opted to use the blind hem stitch and my blind hem foot on my machine rather than hand sew it so that I could get this thing finished in a reasonable amount of time. For being the first time I've made a 1-hour dress, I think I did pretty okay, coming in around 5 hours from concept drafting and construction. As you can see, I'm in the final stages here and the hem is done. And you can also see the cat trying to take up residence on my ironing board while I'm trying to work. No cats were harmed in the making of this video, even though she did keep swishing her tail by the hot iron. So here's the finished garment. I'm really looking forward to the 1930s where we'll have something a little more fitted. So like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and head over to my Instagram. Link is in the description box below. Thanks, and I'll see you soon.